to, or welcome back to, How to Change the World. I am Catherine Alonzo, and this is a podcast for people leading change in your work, your lives, and your community. We explore everything that you need to know in order to drive meaningful impact and change on the local level, and really equip you with the inspiration and tools that you need. I am so excited today to be joined by two members of the Javelina team, Elizabeth Davis, who leads our marketing strategies, working across the board with our nonprofit, business, and government and political clients, and Justin Plumb, who really focuses on our political clients. He has been working tirelessly this year on a lot of legislative races in multiple states, as well as some local races, and he really is a guru for everything political. And we have an incredible conversation about this year and everything that we learned. You know, obviously we're recording it 10 days after this devastating loss in the presidential election. And so it's all kind of fresh and raw, but we really took a beat to look at 2024 and think about what we have learned about how to make change through powerful storytelling and how we are carrying those lessons forward into next year. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with the incredible Justin Plumb and Elizabeth Davis. Justin Plumb and Elizabeth Davis, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Catherine.
I am really excited to do this year in review with you both, where we just kind of take a moment and look back at everything that's happened in 2024. It has for sure been a wild ride, and take stock of what happened, what we learned, what we're sad about, what we're happy about. And given that we are recording this a week and a few days after the 2024 presidential election results, there's a fair amount to be sad about. So I want to start us off on a positive note and ask you that when you think about something from the world of social and community change in 2024, what's something that you feel really good about? Elizabeth, let's start with you.
Yeah, you know, if you had asked me this question a week and a half ago, I would have had a completely different answer. But I do think the two go together. Before I would have said I felt this sort of thread of hope going through people, which we know has been dimmed recently for a lot of people. But what I see that turning into almost immediately with our clients, you know, people who are working and supporting community and social causes, is this sort of strength and resilience and this preparation to protect their community, to continue their cause, and to just really focus even more on their community, because now it's even more in danger. A lot of marginalized communities, you know, are feeling that danger. And so I think just seeing the strength and resilience come out of these folks that are working on these causes has been huge and very positive in the light of what has happened.
I really love hearing you say that. For me, the first few days after the election, the people that I love and speak to the most all reacted at different speeds in terms of some people, you know, there's this adjusting to the news kind of phase, and then there's a figuring out what happened phase, and there's a, you know, an anger phase, and then everybody gets to the, okay, now what do we do next at different times. And that's still true. That's still true today as we record. It'll still be true as people listen to this. And at the same time, I'm really hopeful to hear you talk about the hope and resilience that you're seeing, because I wasn't sure, you know, this time last week, I was like, ooh, we're going to see how this plays out, because it didn't feel like one unified response necessarily. Justin, what about you? What do you think about that?
I think I have been oscillating between reading the awful news coming out about different nominees and things like that, and as the political strategist in me getting excited about what could be in 2026, you know, how we can fight back, you know, what opportunities we have to do that, and just making, you know, trying to execute the most on the opportunities that we have in the future. So it gets me excited about, you know, it's never over. This is not the last election, and, you know, we can change.
Hopefully it's not. Yeah. And is there something particular, fingers crossed, is there something in particular from 2024 that you do feel good about and hopeful about?
Yeah, the issue that really is always at the top of my list that I pay a lot of attention to is housing and the housing shortage and how expensive housing has gotten. And we've made some really monumental progress this year, I feel like, just in the world. In blue states and some red states even have passed really big housing legislation to make it easier to build housing. You know, we did it here in Arizona. We've seen it in California, Minnesota, Montana have all passed bills in the last year or so. And then on the campaign trail too, it used to not be something that people were talking about. And, Kamala Harris was talking all the time about building more housing, and Barack Obama talked about building new housing in his speech at the DNC. So I'm really excited for the future of, supporting and building more housing and addressing one of the biggest issues that I think is going to be part of when we talk about the election results later too.
Yeah. I am really glad that you brought that up. I think that housing is such a critical issue and we at Javelina, we do a lot of work on housing. We have a lot of clients that are focused on housing, homelessness, all aspects of the issue really. And one of the things that I think is really unique and gives me a lot of hope about this particular problem is that research shows that people are largely united in what they think the problem is, which is that there's not enough housing. And it is rare to have consensus amongst a population as vast and diverse as ours about what the cause of a problem is. And that is an incredible asset in the movement to fix that problem. And I feel really, really hopeful about that too. So let's turn to the year in politics. So as we have alluded to, it is not the outcome that we wanted. It is not the outcome that we hoped for. At this point, when we're 10 days out from the election result, what are some of your big takeaways, Justin? And let's start with the presidential election, and then we'll look down ballot next.
Yeah, I think if you've been on social media at all since election day, it's people left and right trying to find reasons for the result, so that we can correct it and try to do better. And I think everybody's got their pet issue for it. I think the one thing to keep in mind is I don't think that we can make any crazy takeaways that this is a huge shift or a huge realignment. We've seen in democratic countries across the world this year that the party in power, whether it's been left, right, or center, has just done terribly. And from the looks of it, Kamala Harris was the closest, of any democratic country in the world of an incumbent winning, an election this year. So I don't think that we can, we still have a lot to learn from this election and why it ended up the way that it did. But I don't think it's a moment of complete reflection, back to the drawing board, square one. The two things that I've really seen that really play a role in this is something I'm calling the wrong track theory. Catherine, this, and Elizabeth, this from looking at polls. They always ask at the beginning of the poll, is blank on the right track or wrong track, whether that be the country, schools, or your city. And I've never seen a poll since I've started working in politics where people haven't picked wrong track. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It doesn't matter what the geographic area they're talking about is. People just feel negatively about the world. They think everything's going in the wrong direction. And the result of that, I think, has changed presidential politics. We historically have thought of incumbents having an advantage, having the bully pulpit of the presidency to talk about their, achievements. And I think it's now the case that incumbents have a disadvantage when it comes to presidential elections. We have now seen the party in power lose, every year since 2008, except for 2012. Obama 2012, I think, is maybe the exception to the rule that we're going to see now, where it might just be, parties switching powers every 4 years because people are not happy with the status quo.
I also think that there's an element of misinformation that really creeped into this election where, we know that adversarial countries like Russia are trying to influence people through social media, for example. But there's a significant amount of misinformation in this election, more so than any other that I feel I've witnessed. And I think it's time for the United States to have a really a conversation about this, about how can we stop misinformation? How can we teach people media literacy? Because it seems so few people know how to even cite a source or know if a source is legitimate. And I think that played a huge role in this election. I also think when you look at the policies that people wanted, if you took the face of the person, the personality away from it, if you didn't know if it was Kamala or Donald, a lot of people would choose Kamala's policies without realizing. And I think that's part of it. You have this misinformation going around, but you also have this personality aspect of it all, where I feel like most people who likely voted for Trump did so for a reason, and it was very much so personality based. It was based on a lot of things he says, not necessarily what he's going to do, because we're already seeing what he's going to do, which does not comport with a lot of the things he said, right? So I think there's this imbalance of people really knowing what's true and what's not true anymore, and we need to figure that out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it dovetails with one of the things that I've been thinking about since last week, which is that at Javelina, we organize everything that we do into, is this a branding project or a marketing project? And brand is really about encapsulating what is the essence of an organization, a company, a political party, a candidate, whatever it is. And your brand lives in your message, in your visual identity. It lives in the fonts that you use, the color palette that you use. And then your marketing is the strategies and tactics that you use to deliver your brand to your target audience. And I think if you look at this election through the eyes of that, or through the lens of that dichotomy, branding and marketing, that Democrats and Kamala had a branding issue, not a marketing issue. And I actually, to be very clear, think that Kamala ran a phenomenal campaign. Like, she did a lot with the resources and the time that she was given. But the underlying brand of the party, and it actually links to what both of you are saying, it was just not matching what voters want. And I don't think there was a problem with the marketing. I thought that the tactics employed, the strategies employed were all right. They were reaching the right people, but there just wasn't time to make sure that the brand was really representative of what people wanted.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think people got to know her.
And I completely agree with that as well. You know, we've seen in the data that the Harris campaign did better in the swing states, you know, where they were really actively doing their marketing, their campaigning, their ads, their ground game. You know, when people saw that, she did better than in the areas where there, you know, wasn't that massive spending. You know, that it kind of shows that it really wasn't the campaign. It really wasn't the marketing that was the problem. It was really the brand of the party. And, you know, one of the top things I've seen on the list of why swing voters, you know, really felt misaligned with the Democratic Party is they felt that Democrats were too focused on cultural issues and not about the everyday economic issues that, you know, people were facing.
And for me, that's interesting because I think all of these social issues also impact the other, right? The economy. Abortion is an economy issue, right? Like at its core, allowing women to be able to plan their lives out and go into the workforce, that's an economy issue. And so I think a lot of it is so many issues too that I don't know that people fully understood each issue. So it was easier to kind of choose the personality.
Yeah. Well, and I think that sensation of sort of it's all, the economy is terrible, it's all in the economy and we're all on the wrong track, definitely was felt at the presidential level. I'm curious if you think, Justin, that it was felt in the down ballot races too. What were some of your big takeaways from everything that happened under that top of the ticket?
Yeah, I think that the down ballot races are really interesting. We'd kind of seen historically that Democrats had a drop-off problem, right? They could win at the top of the ticket with candidates like Obama, but they were having trouble, winning Congress seats or the legislature. And this was the year that we have really, but that's been changing. This is the year that we've really seen that in full force. Harris lost all 7 swing states. And in every swing state but one that had a competitive U.S. Senate race, Democrats won those races. We now don't have that drop-off problem. People are completing the ballot, and voting for Democrats more, in those down ballot races. And I think that that's really like a mechanism of, the brand at the top of the ticket being really the difference there. And also just the voter population that supports the Democratic Party is different than it was 8 years ago. We have, folks who in our camp who watch the news every day, pay very close attention to politics, and they want to vote down ballot. At the same time, we have candidates running for Senate and Congress who they can separate themselves from the national brand, of Democrats that is not as popular in a way that the presidential candidates cannot.
I thought it was interesting that some of those ticket splitters, people who down ballot chose differently from presidential, often voted for contradictory ideas as well, which again, to me, makes me think they're not voting for policy so much. For example, voting to restore abortion rights, but then voting for someone who wants a nationwide abortion ban. Contradictory ideas. So it is really interesting to see how many people split tickets that way.
Yeah, that really stood out to me too, Elizabeth. And it happened in 2016 too. And I remember specifically in Arizona in 2016 when Trump won the state by 4 points, I think it was. And then I think by 11 points also elected to increase the minimum wage statewide and introduce earned sick pay. And those were two, seemingly, actually maybe not in the eyes of voters, but seemingly contradictory positions. And so it's fascinating to me that the choices behind who people will vote for president, because I think you're probably right that it's not always policy. Justin, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say that there was a time, I think, like before 2016, people would say ticket splitting is dead. It's over. Nobody does it anymore. And I think that this election really proved otherwise, that there is a lot of ticket splitters. I think not as many as there were in the 90s and earlier, but still quite a few in a close election that can really change the results, which is really kind of a heartening thing for us to know that there are really gettable voters. There is another realm of voters who, have supported, local Democrats or have supported Democratic policies, that we could win over in future elections. It's not like we've hit our peak popularity.
I think there's another element to it as well, and you almost have to say it when it comes to this election, is that there were a lot of outright lies as well. For example, a lie that Donald Trump told, he said that no, RFK Jr. would not be in charge of HHS. He said that out loud, and then he nominated him, yesterday? So, there's also a lot of sort of tricking people who are voting, which is a major element that we have to start including into these conversations pretty much since 2016, because I don't know that we've seen such provable, outright lying as we did in recent elections, particularly this one.
Well, and one of the very strange things is that voters know that Donald Trump lies. I think a lot of people recognize that when they are voting for him, that not everything he says is true. And yet their dissatisfaction with the status quo is so strong that a dishonest change is better than a more honest status quo. Or maybe they don't consider it honest because there's no trust that what is the existing power structures are telling the truth.
Yeah. And now we're seeing these Google searches, right? The top Google searches right after the election were, how do I change my vote? And what is a tariff? And these are questions that probably should have been asked prior to the election, right? But you're seeing that when people lie to your face and you don't get what you voted for, there's immediate regret from a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that in some ways, Donald Trump's lying, I think, was an advantage to him because people grafted onto him whatever they wanted to believe. You have people who were in the middle who supported Donald Trump because they don't think that he's actually, convicted to, opposing abortion rights, and they thought it was okay to vote for him and support abortion rights. And then you have other people who voted for him who are excited to think that he's going to ban abortion. It's because he hasn't really taken clear stances on a lot of issues and has waffled back and forth. People will, vote for him thinking that he's going to, fulfill what they want. And, at the end of the day, now that he's in office and picking choices, I think people are going to regret it because he can't satisfy both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
That does make 2026 more interesting, though.
Well, and to Justin's point at the top of the pod, the sun will keep rising. We will get to have another election, and that's what we will work toward.
Cross our fingers.
Yeah. After we're going to take a quick ad break, and then when we come back, we'll turn away our attention away from politics and towards what we're seeing in the social change sector, in the business and non-profit sectors. Hold on, and we'll be right back. Ever had a book or movie ruined for you because of a bad ending? Yeah, us too. Around here, we believe that storytelling can change the world. And what makes or breaks a story? The ending. That's right. In order for people to care about what you are doing, they need to understand why it matters, what kind of world you're creating in the end. We call this your why. And at Javelina, we're experts in helping our clients not only find their why, but build an entire brand and marketing strategy around it. Visit javelina.co to sign up for a free consultation for our branding and messaging services. And let's bring your why to life. Okay, so we have delved deep into what politics has showed us about social change in 2024. But let's turn our attention away from politics and more to other areas of the social change sector. Elizabeth, what are some of the biggest areas of focus that you have seen this year?
It's interesting. With our nonprofit clients, I've seen a major focus on fundraising, which is something you see across the board with nonprofits every year, right? But I've seen a major focus this year on fundraising and less of a focus on trying to speak directly to the people they serve or bring more people in to serve, if that makes sense. It feels like a lot of nonprofits have the people that they want to serve ready and waiting for them, is what it feels like to me. And so now it's about how do we make enough money to support them and to keep this going? Because I think there are a lot of people who are in circumstances that nonprofits are serving right now. Whether that is the housing and homelessness issue that we just talked about, whether that's abortion care, whether that is the LGBTQ community. I think a lot of people are worried right now. That is another shift that I'm seeing is in the last week and a half. Our clients have definitely had a rough time with the political environment. There was a bill that I don't believe passed, but it did get fast-tracked in the House of Representatives about being able to target nonprofits and take away their tax exemption. That didn't pass, thankfully. But those are the types of things that are really keeping people up at night when you work at a nonprofit. And so I think we're going to see messaging shift as well, because I think there's going to be more of a sense of urgency for a lot of people. If you are a trans person seeking trans care, there is going to be a significant sense of urgency to get some things, to get the care you need and the things you need done. The same with, for example, we see gay marriage is something that people are starting to talk about again. And so you're starting to see a lot of these groups who thought that their issues may have been somewhat settled, now having to rehash that messaging and come up with new messaging and trying to figure out how to speak to not only the people they serve, but their donors, the community at large. Because now a lot of people are shifting to defense mode.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to your point about fundraising, I think one of the things that comes up in conversations with our clients all the time is that fundraising for nonprofits is entirely different in a post-COVID environment. It
Oh,
is
sure.
just different. Like there has not been a return to pre-pandemic levels of giving for a lot of our clients. And so they are kind of moving away from this idea of how do we get back to where we were, and are more sort of adjusting their fundraising plans and their allotment of resources and to be based on the new reality. And it's going to be really interesting actually to see how fundraising is impacted by the new administration, because the need is only going to grow.
Absolutely. And, I think there's a number of ways that people can give of themselves to a nonprofit, right? There's the treasure, which is the money. There's time where you can go volunteer, and there's talent. How can you help them? And I think after COVID, you saw people's time go elsewhere, right? Because a lot of people aren't leaving their sort of environments as much. I know I don't. I stay in my space a lot of my time now. And so that does take away from people being able to volunteer too. So it's not just like the money that's coming in, but they're losing the talent they need. They're losing those volunteers they need. And so there's this big effort to bring all of that back, maybe post-COVID.
Justin, what are you seeing in the non-political social change sector?
I kind of had a question for both of you. I was curious if you were thinking about, when it comes to nonprofit fundraising, oftentimes people give when they are driven to action. They feel like there's a concern in the world and they want to solve it, which is why, for a lot of nonprofits, they saw kind of a surge in donations during COVID, if they were in that particular space, because people immediately saw the need, to give in their community. I'm kind of curious if you think that now that we are entering another Trump administration, if you think we may see that same thing again, the people being driven to action, wanting to give and act and protect people in a way that they can.
Elizabeth, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. There's a few things that I think are going to play into that, right? We know that people feel very strongly right now that the economy is not good or that prices are too high. And I think that's going to play into how much money people are willing to part with. And knowing that likely consumer prices are going to rise if we have major tariffs, I think that could take a hit a little bit. But I do agree that there is that sense of urgency when the problem is so upfront and in your face that you're like, how can I help create a solution? I am very much hoping that that's the direction things go, that people see, it's not going great. We really need to rely on these people who are on the ground doing that work. We'll see. I think it's going to depend on what people think of the economy too.
Yeah, I think the economy is going to be such a huge factor in this. I think there's another dichotomy, like what will people take path A or path B, that I'm thinking about when considering this question, Justin. So, and it's too soon to tell, we will see. But one way to react to the election result and everything that's going to happen in the new administration is to get fired up and to donate time, talent, resources to organizations that are in the fight. The other way, and I just in the last 10 days, I have seen a lot of this in my network and the people I talk to, is sheer exhaustion and disengaging. And I want to emphasize that there is nothing wrong with that. Like, rest is a really important part of driving social change. And actually think donating to the organizations that are in the fight is actually a really good way to rest. Sort of give your resources to other organizations and take the rest that you need, and then check back in when you're ready. What will be interesting to see is if the rest also becomes kind of disengaging financially. And so I think our nonprofit clients who are fundraising in the next year, maybe, and I'm literally sort of thinking out loud, but maybe that is an interesting message to explore, which is take the rest that you need, because we're going to need you to check back in when we need to rest. The way to make sure the fight continues is to invest financially when you have the resources to do so.
Absolutely. The people that are on the ground doing the work are the ones that burn out very quickly because they not only are doing the work, but they're seeing the issue up front and in their face. Things that we don't have to think about on a daily basis necessarily, they see every single day. You know, whether it's someone who doesn't have a home, whether they're helping immigrants who are undocumented, like they're seeing the issue right up front. And so burnout is a major concern for nonprofit workers in general. And I think self-care is going to be required over the next 4 years in order to maintain the strength that everybody's going to need to continue the fight.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think also, you know, we're moving into the ninth year of Trump, right? Just dominating our national landscape. And so years 9 through 12 and 13 are just exhausting. And one of the things that I have found the hardest about his entry into the national and international stage is the rhetoric. Is so divisive. It is so cruel. It is so mean. And I feel exhausted by it. I just feel absolutely wiped out. And the problem with that rhetoric is, well, there's many problems with it, but one of the problems with it is it trickles down. It trickles down into local politics. I mean, we've seen just how divisive school boards have gotten, and really around some key issues that started in the pandemic but have escalated since. And school board members, which is for the most part in America a volunteer position, an elected unpaid position, getting death threats, having to have security escort them to the school board members to their cars after school board meetings because issues become so contentious. And not that hate in our politics is new. It is, of course, not. But man, is the temperature been really turned up by Donald Trump and those that support his platform. And I think that, I mean, that's the bit that I find the hardest. And I think a lot of people just feel like, or have noticed that when they stop consuming it, they kind of feel better.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I've noticed too is like the rhetoric is not just cruel. It goes after the most marginalized and vulnerable people out there. You know, when they spent tens of millions of dollars on anti-trans ads, that's 2% of our population. And they're probably the most vulnerable of our population. And to create hate for people who really don't need it. I mean, truly, it's hard enough to try to be yourself in a world that doesn't want you to. It's really hard to watch the most vulnerable populations get just brutally attacked.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we know that the stories that are told are so important. The stories that are told truly shape our understanding of the world and how we engage with it. And at Javelina, that's ultimately what we do, right? We are helping our clients tell stories. So I'm curious, what is a story that you have helped tell this year that you're proud of? Justin, let's start with you.
Yeah, I was really personally invested in the Gilbert Public Schools override this year. They, it's a very conservative suburb of Phoenix. And they actually lost their override, which is essentially like the school funding that helps pay for things like teachers and extracurriculars like music and athletics, all those sorts, gifted programs, all those sorts of things. And they had actually lost a year ago. They're in a district where, it's can be 50-50 sometimes. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, and they had lost their override last year, and were worried that they might lose the funding. So they were forced to go out again this year and ask the voters to, continue their override funding. And, this is a conservative district where a lot of people are skeptical of public schools, unfortunately. And so the campaign that we ran had to really talk to some of those folks about why this funding is really, really necessary and important for, their community. We told the story of how the district was, using their dollars well, was really a high performing district, really serves their students well and serves the community as well, and showed that these strong public schools, not only, we would sometimes hear from folks on the ground talking to voters. So they were like, I don't have any kids in school anymore. Why do I care? And we really had to navigate that issue and show why, something like a school override really means something to somebody who doesn't have a kid directly in school, whether it's their property values or the community that they live in or the future economy. Employers need, strongly educated public school students, to have a strong economy in your neighborhood. And we were able to really communicate this story and, turn a loss into a win this year in a district that voted for Donald Trump by 15 points. And so it was really awesome, to get those voters to, support their local schools and vote yes.
That's so cool. Elizabeth, how about you?
The stories that I've told that I'm most proud of this year, I don't think there's just one or two that I can really pinpoint. It's been all of them. I've worked with, we worked with the gun violence prevention group, which is near and dear to my heart. And so, that meant a lot to me. And I love telling stories like that because it is an issue that is so prevalent in our world right now, especially in the United States. Gun violence is an epidemic. And so working with people who are really intelligent and trying to figure it out it's just such a smart way. And they were able to prove it in multiple cities was really exciting for me. I've also really enjoyed rebrandings with nonprofits this year. A lot of nonprofits coming to us to get rebrands, but then, we help them launch the brand as well. And so one that's been really exciting for me is the Southwest Center for HIV or AIDS and HIV. And I'm not going to say the name because they have not launched the new brand yet, but it's beautiful. And what I love about it is that it really encapsulates, the whole community, and the way this rebrand changes things for them. I think it opens up what they can do, who they can serve, what they can offer. It really speaks more to the services that they provide. They're a sort of a long-standing nonprofit in the community, and so as a clinic, and it's just great to see that they're now evolving with the community and taking it like a step further, and they're really able to reiterate the why behind it so that folks understand it, because sometimes it's hard. If you've had a name for 30 years, it's really hard to break people from that name specifically. But it didn't really show exactly what they do anymore. And so it was time to move on. I think they're doing it in a really smart way. And I'm just looking forward to seeing how the community responds to it.
I love those examples. And the thing that is coming to mind as you guys share those stories is that it reminds me that there is so much good work happening on the local level. And one, to bring us kind of all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, when you talked about wrong track theory or wrong track thinking, Justin, where, in poll after poll after poll after poll, no matter what it's for, no matter who you're asking, voters will say, we're on the wrong track. Like, people just feel like stuff's going wrong. And I've got to think that a huge cause of that is what we all consume. And if we went to any news website right now, any major outlet news website right now, the vast majority of headlines will have a negative bias. And there is just so much less attention on the incredible work that's happening in our communities. And one of the favorite things that I worked on this year was for our client STN, which is based here in Phoenix. And STN stands for Social Television Network. And they focus on telling stories of positive change in local communities. And I find it to be so refreshing and so uplifting. And they have a really cool format where they film in front of a live studio audience once a month. And I've had the opportunity to go and listen and watch the show. And they just have incredible leaders from businesses, nonprofits, government agencies who come in and talk about a variety of issues, from housing and homelessness to sustainability to equity. And each month, there's story after story after story of life-changing initiatives, of policies being passed, of shifts in behavior being seen in our local communities, in changes in attitude, in new ideas, even organizations themselves becoming more inclusive, more diverse, more equitable. And this work just is not celebrated in a big way. And I think that is why it is so important. Is why I put this question in our outline today. It is so important to celebrate, to think about, to share examples of the good work that is happening, because there's a ton of it.
Absolutely.
So as you guys look back on 2024, what is the biggest thing that you learned this year about how to tell stories that do in fact create change?
For me, I always come back to target audiences. We talk about this all the time in our work, whether we're talking to in a political campaign or a nonprofit or a business. You have to have your messaging in mind with who you're speaking to and who your target audience is. And know that there are different target audiences for different things. Donors to a political campaign, it's a very different target audience than swing voters. And you have to talk to them differently. And we saw this really clearly in the presidential election. We saw this really clearly in the GPS override election that I was talking about earlier. We have worked on overrides in deep blue districts as well, and you don't communicate to those folks in the same way that you would communicate to a more conservative district, and you really have to keep that in mind. Different people have different values, different knowledge about the world. Some people are super tuned into politics and the news. Other folks, they scroll right past it. They, are not paying close attention. You have to message to these people very differently. And, I think we've gotten really, really good at that. And at the same time, I think that we are, seeing that it can sometimes be really difficult to silo that messaging, to different audiences, especially when we talk about a presidential election, in a way that, Kamala Harris took a lot of moderate positions in her marketing and the way she talked to swing voters. And at the same time, voters still thought she was, too liberal, too progressive, all those sorts of things, because they were associating it with, the messaging that a lot of folks talk about in Democratic primaries, right? And so, sometimes, we get too much into target audiences when it comes to the brand, because how you talk to one target audience can define your brand with people who don't pay as close of attention.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think what I'm going to be watching out for is a few things. I'm going to be looking for that strength and conviction from leaders. I expect to see people working within their capacity, because everybody's going to really need to kind of double down and focus. And there's going to be an additional element of stress with the political environment and the rhetoric and everything we've talked about. I think it's really important this year that people work within their capacity. Don't try to take on more than you are able to do. And I say that like as a strategist in general. When I'm writing strategies, I write it to the capacity of the team. I don't write it so that it's this big overarching thing where I'm going to check off every single thing on my list necessarily. And so I would say really pick the areas where you want to focus. I would say everyone really needs to lean into community, because that's where you're going to find your people. If you're feeling alone or isolated, if you're feeling like this election left you feeling unheard, I know some people feel a little bit broken after the election. And I think the way to treat that is to lean into community, is to really get to know your community. And I don't just mean your friends. I mean, get to know your community, volunteer for something, get involved. Because the only way that we can really fight this, or, for lack of a better term, fascism, the only way to fight that is through everybody working hard, nobody giving up. If you give up, they win. So I think working within your capacity, making sure that you're taking care of yourself, leaning into community, and then just really bringing out that bravery and that strength and that conviction for your cause is going to make a huge difference across the board for people.
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. So TLDR, tell really good stories, tell positive stories, tell them to specific target audiences, and take a nap.
Absolutely.
There's your roadmap for change in 2025, carrying forward everything that we learned in this, I don't know, cocktail of a year.
It's been a year.
It's been a year. It feels like it's been a year since the election.
We're in a time warp for sure.
Yeah,
it's been 10 days, I think.
I know, it's wild.
I miss who I was 10 days ago.
I remember her. She had so much hope.
She sure did.
Well, Justin, Elizabeth, this has been a blast. Thank you guys so much for doing this. And we'll do this again. We'll check back in and see how our social change makers are doing as the new year unfolds.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Catherine.
There you have it. I hope that you had a great time with us and took something valuable away from this conversation. Thanks again to Elizabeth and Justin. What really I think my big takeaway is the importance of focusing on the good work that is happening in the world. It is not to say that there isn't some really big issues and some really huge challenges coming our way, but focusing on the power of the work that is happening can be really important fuel for keeping on going. And there certainly is a ton of work happening in our local communities that's truly life-changing. Many of you whom are listening who are leading. So thank you so much for your service. And I also want to say thank you very much to a very kind person who left an incredibly kind review recently. And I want to ask that if you have enjoyed this episode, I would love if you would go rate and review on whatever platform you listen to. It really helps us grow. And the review from, I'll call them COJS because the username is, it does not show who it is, but COJS. And they shared there have been so many incredible guests on this podcast. I've learned so much from their stories and perspectives about how to create change. So thank you so very much, COJS, for your kind words and for listening. And like I said, if you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would go rate and review. I hope you have a great one, and I'll be back here next time to tell another story of change.